It was supposed to be just another clip in the endless WNBA highlight cycle. Then the visual leaked, and the moment Breanna Stewart finally spoke on it, the entire basketball world leaned in, because she didn't just analyze the play, she dismantled the entire narrative surrounding it. And the footage that followed, it didn't just go viral. It exposed a fault line in how we evaluate defense, spacing, and physicality in the modern game. You've seen the sequence, the hard screen, the delayed rotation, the collision that sent both players crashing into the baseline. But what the casual viewer misses is what actually happened in the 3 seconds before the contact. Stewart didn't point out a foul. She pointed out a breakdown of defensive philosophy. And when she finally put into words, it wasn't commentary. It was a masterclass in how the league's identity is shifting right under our feet. Let's rewind. Sophie Cunningham didn't arrive in this league as a defensive anchor. She built her career on spacing, off-ball movement, and a relentless willingness to dive for loose balls. But expectations evolved rapidly. The WNBA changed. Teams stopped asking wings to just stand in the corner and wait for kickouts. They started asking them to switch everything, to guard bigger bodies, to absorb contact without flinching. And Cunningham stepped into that fire. She didn't ask for it. The league demanded it. But answering and executing are two completely different conversations. That's what Stewart understands better than almost anyone. You can't just tell a player to be a stopper overnight and expect them to instantly read the floor like a veteran. You have to teach the geometry, the angles, the timing. And that's exactly where the breakdown happened. Not in the contact, in the decision-making that preceded it. Stewart didn't need to yell to make her point. She just laid out the film. Frame by frame, she showed how Cunningham was caught in the exact same trap that catches half the league's perimeter defenders. Overcommit, hesitate, recover too late, try to compensate with force instead of positioning. It's not a character flaw. It's a teaching gap. And when Stewart finally called it out, the room didn't argue. It listened, because she wasn't attacking a player. She was exposing a lazy excuse coaches use when a rotation fails. You have to understand the weight of what Stewart just did. She spent over a decade being scrutinized. Every missed rotation, every forced shot, every post entry that gets tipped away. She knows exactly what it feels like to have your fundamentals questioned on national television. And instead of staying silent, she used that footage to draw a line. Physicality without IQ is just chaos. And chaos doesn't win championships. The viral moment wasn't about two players colliding. It was about two philosophies clashing. The old guard that says you can muscle through mistakes, and the new reality that says timing and anticipation will always outlast brute effort. Cunningham's toughness is undeniable, but toughness doesn't replace footwork. It amplifies it. And until that connection clicks, we're going to keep seeing those same breakdowns, same collisions, same frustrated sighs from the bench. Stewart knows this because she's lived it. She's been the player teams try to bully in the post. She's been told she's not quick enough, not strong enough, not versatile enough. And every single time, she answered with film study, with repetition, with an almost obsessive attention to detail. That's why her breakdown of the Cunningham footage hit so differently. It wasn't criticism. It was a blueprint. But here's what nobody's talking about yet. The moment the clip started trending, the narrative immediately split. Half the league defended Cunningham as just playing hard. The other half called it reckless positioning. Both sides are missing the actual point. Stewart didn't frame it as a personal failure. She framed it as a rotational math problem. And once you see the math, you can't unsee it. The spacing was off. The help defender was too low. The communication broke down before the play even crossed half court. That's why this footage won't disappear in 48 hours. It's a case study. And what Stewart said about it, that's just the opening statement. The real breakdown hasn't even started. Because when you peel back the layers of that sequence, you start seeing the exact same mistakes teams make when they try to switch modern pick and rolls without teaching their wings how to navigate traffic. And once we trace that error back to its source, everything about how we evaluate perimeter defense changes. So let's break down the math Stewart was talking about. Because once you see it, you can't unsee it. The play starts with a simple ball screen at the top of the key. Standard action. Nothing exotic. But watch Cunningham's eyes. She's locked on the ball handler. She's not scanning. She's not reading the roller. She's reacting. And in today's WNBA, reaction is a half step too slow. Stewart paused the film right there. Frame frozen. She pointed to the space between Cunningham and the paint. That gap? That's where championships are won or lost. Not in the highlight dunks. Not in the buzzer beaters. In the split-second decisions that happen when nobody's watching. Cunningham filled that gap with effort. Stewart filled it with anticipation. And that's the difference between a good defender and a great one. But here's the uncomfortable truth. The league is asking players like Cunningham to do something they were never trained to do. Switch everything. Guard multiple positions. Navigate traffic without fouling. And we're judging them like they've been doing it their whole careers. They haven't. The game evolved faster than the development pipeline. So we're watching brilliant athletes try to solve advanced calculus with beginner tools. Stewart knows this better than anyone. She remembers when wings were just wings. Spot up, close out, crash the glass. Simple. Now, you're a point forward, a switchable defender, a secondary playmaker. The mental load is staggering. And when a player like Cunningham gets caught in a rotation, it's not always a lack of heart. Sometimes it's a lack of reps, a lack of clarity, a lack of coaching that bridges the gap between old expectations and new realities. That's why Stewart's breakdown went deeper than the surface level take. She didn't just say Sophie should have been here. She showed why being there requires a chain of decisions that started 3 possessions earlier. Communication, trust, visual study, muscle memory. Defense is a moment. It's a system. And when one piece hesitates, the whole structure wobbles. The viral clip captured the wobble, but Stewart captured the blueprint to fix it. And that's what makes this moment different. It's not drama, it's diagnosis. She's not calling out a player. She's calling attention to a pattern. And patterns are what separate good teams from great ones. Think about the last time you watched a playoff series. The teams that advanced weren't the ones with the most athletic defenders. They were the ones who knew exactly where to be before the play even developed. That's not instinct. That's preparation. And preparation is what Stewart was highlighting. Not effort, not toughness, preparation. Cunningham is both in spades. Everyone knows that, but effort without direction is just energy wasted. And in a league where margins are razor thin, wasted energy is the difference between a stop and a bucket. Stewart wasn't questioning Cunningham's motor. She was questioning the map. And that's a conversation worth having. Because if we only praise hustle without teaching positioning, we're setting players up to fail. We're celebrating the collision instead of preventing it. We're rewarding the recovery instead of mastering the read. And that's not development. That's damage control. Stewart's visual session wasn't about blame. It was about clarity. She showed how to help defenders angle force Cunningham into a no-win choice. Commit early and risk the backdoor. Stay home and concede the drive. There was no perfect answer because the setup was flawed, and that's the real lesson. Defense isn't about individual heroics. It's about collective geometry. When the clip dropped, fans immediately picked sides. Team Sophie, Team Breanna. But Stewart wasn't playing that game. She was playing chess. She knew the footage would spark debate, but she also knew the debate would miss the point if people only watched the highlight. So she forced everyone to watch the build-up, the setup, the subtle cues that determine success or failure. And that's where the real story lives. Not in the contact, in the context. Because once you understand the context, you start seeing the same patterns everywhere. The over-rotations, the miscommunications, the well-intentioned hustle that leads to breakdowns. It's not a Sophie Cunningham problem. It's a league-wide teaching moment. Stewart didn't say that outright. She didn't have to. She just let the visuals speak. And the visuals said everything. The spacing was off. The timing was late. The recovery was desperate. Not because Cunningham lacked desire, because the system didn't give her a clear path. And when the system fails, even the best athletes look lost. That's the uncomfortable truth this viral moment exposed. We're asking players to execute complex defensive schemes without always giving them the tools to succeed. And when they stumble, we call it a lapse. But what if it's not a lapse? What if it's a gap? A gap in coaching, in development, in expectation management. Stewart saw that gap, and instead of ignoring it, she highlighted it, not to shame, to solve. Because that's what champions do. They don't just play the game. They study it. They break it down. They rebuild it better. And that's exactly what she did with those few seconds of footage. But here's what comes next. Now that the visual is out there, now that the conversation has started, teams can't unsee it. Coaches can't ignore it. Players can't pretend it doesn't matter. The standard has been raised, not by a highlight, by a lesson. And that lesson is spreading. Because once you understand the geometry Stewart was teaching, you start seeing it everywhere. Every rotation, every switch, every recovery. The game changes when you see the patterns. And once you see them, you can't play the same way again. But here's where it gets interesting. Because once Stewart's breakdown started circulating, something unexpected happened. Coaches didn't dismiss it. They studied it. Assistant coaches pulled up the same footage. They froze the same frames. They asked the same questions Stewart asked. What if the problem isn't the player? What if it's the progression? Think about that. In a league obsessed with highlight reels and hot takes, a veteran superstar just shifted the conversation from blame to blueprint. And that changes everything. Because now it's not about whether Sophie Cunningham is good enough. It's about whether we're teaching defense the right way, whether we're building systems that set players up to succeed, or whether we're just expecting talent to overcome design flaws. Stewart didn't stop at the rotation. She went deeper. She showed how the initial closeout dictated everything that followed. The angle Cunningham took, the speed of her recovery, the moment she committed. Each decision narrowed her options. Each choice eliminated alternatives. And by the time the contact happened, the outcome was already written, not by effort, by geometry. That's the lesson most viewers missed. Defense isn't reactive, it's predictive. You don't wait to see what happens. You anticipate what could happen, and you position yourself to take away the most dangerous option first. Stewart has spent her career mastering that skill, not just reading the play, reading the intention behind the play. And that's what she was trying to teach through that visual session. But teaching isn't the same as doing, and that's the tension here. Cunningham can watch the clip 100 times. She can understand the theory. She can nod along in the visual room. But executing that anticipation in real time, at full speed, against elite competition, that's a different challenge. That's where reps come in. That's where coaching comes in. That's where patience comes in. And patience is in short supply these days. Fans want instant results. Analysts want hot takes. Teams want wins now. So when a player like Cunningham gets caught in a breakdown, the reaction isn't, let's teach her. It's, she's not good enough. But Stewart pushed back against that narrative, not with emotion, with evidence. She showed that the breakdown wasn't isolated. It was systemic, and systemic problems require systemic solutions. That's why this moment matters beyond the viral clip. It's forcing a conversation about how we develop defenders in the modern WNBA. Are we prioritizing versatility over mastery? Are we asking players to do too much too soon? Are we confusing athleticism with understanding? Stewart's visual session didn't answer those questions, but it made them impossible to ignore. And the ripple effects are already spreading. Watch the next few games. Pay attention to how wings rotate. Notice how coaches communicate on switches. Listen for the subtle cues that signal anticipation instead of reaction. You'll start seeing Stewart's lesson in real time, not because she demanded it, because the logic is undeniable. But here's the twist. The same principles that expose Cunningham's breakdown also highlight her strengths. Because when she gets the geometry right, when the timing clicks, when the communication flows, she becomes a nightmare. Her effort combined with proper positioning creates a defensive presence that can swing games. Stewart wasn't trying to diminish that. She was trying to unlock it. That's the difference between criticism and coaching. Criticism tears down. Coaching builds up. Stewart's breakdown wasn't about tearing Cunningham down. It was about building her up, showing her the path from good to great, from reactive to predictive, from effort to execution. And that's a message every player in the league can learn from. Because let's be real, This isn't just a Sophie Cunningham story. It's every wing trying to adapt to the modern game. Every defender asked to switch, recover, contest, and communicate at a pace that didn't exist 5 years ago. The league evolved. The expectations evolved. But did the development evolve at the same speed? Stewart's visual suggests it didn't. And that gap is where breakdowns happen. But gaps can be closed. And that's the hopeful part. Because once you identify the problem, you can design the solution. Better visual study, clearer communication protocols, more targeted reps in practice, smarter rotations built on anticipation instead of reaction. Stewart didn't just point out the flaw, she hinted at the fix. And that's what makes this moment transformative. Now imagine if every team adopted that mindset. If every coach prioritized teaching geometry over praising hustle. If every player studied the build-up instead of just a highlight, the league wouldn't just get more athletic. It would get smarter, more cohesive, more dominant. And that's the future Stewart was pointing toward. But getting there requires honesty. It requires admitting that effort isn't enough. That heart doesn't replace footwork. That desire doesn't substitute for anticipation. And that's a hard truth for fans to accept, for players to internalize, for coaches to implement. But Stewart didn't shy away from it. She leaned in, and that's why her voice carries weight. The viral footage captured a collision, but Stewart captured the conversation that needs to happen next. Not about who is right or wrong, not about who's tough or soft, about how we build better defenders, how we create smarter systems, how we bridge the gap between expectation and execution. That's the real story. And it's just getting started. Because now that the visual is out there, now that the standard has been raised, there's no going back. Players will study it. Coaches will reference it. Analysts will debate it. And the next time a similar breakdown happens, the question won't be why did she fail? It'll be what did we teach? And that shift in perspective, that's the legacy of this moment. But here's what nobody saw coming. After Stewart's breakdown went viral, Cunningham didn't respond with defensiveness. She responded with visual of her own. Not highlights, not excuses, just raw, unedited practice footage. And in those clips, you could see the work, the repetition, the quiet determination to close the gap Stewart exposed. That's the part the hot take cycle missed. This wasn't a feud. It was a feedback loop. Stewart identified a flaw. Cunningham accepted the challenge. And the league got a front row seat to how champions actually develop, not through drama, through discipline, not through debate, through dedication. But discipline doesn't trend. Dedication doesn't generate clicks. So while the internet was busy picking sides, something more powerful was happening behind the scenes. Cunningham was retraining her instincts, rewiring her reactions, rebuilding her defensive IQ from the ground up. And Stewart? She was watching, not as a critic, as a consultant, because that's what separates legends from everyone else. They don't just play the game, they elevate it. Stewart knew her words would carry weight, so she chose them carefully, not to tear down, to build up. And Cunningham recognized that intention, so she leaned in, not away. That's the dynamic the viral moment obscured. It wasn't conflict. It was collaboration disguised as controversy. Now watch what happens next. The next time Cunningham rotates. The next time she navigates traffic. The next time she has to choose between effort and anticipation. You'll see the change. Subtle at first. A half step quicker. A better angle. A clearer read. Then it compounds. The confidence grows. The timing sharpens. The impact multiplies. That's the power of precise feedback. It doesn't just fix a play. It transforms a player. And Stewart didn't just give feedback. She gave a framework. A way to think about defense that goes beyond hustle, beyond heart, beyond the highlight. She gave Cunningham a lens to see the game differently. And once you see it differently, you play it differently. But transformation takes time. And time is a luxury in a results-driven league. Fans want wins now. Coaches need stops now. Analysts demand answers now. So when Cunningham inevitably has another breakdown, and she will, the reaction won't be she's learning. It'll be she's regressing. That's the trap. That's the noise Stewart was trying to cut through. Because development isn't linear. It's messy. It's 2 steps forward, 1 step back. It's breakthroughs followed by setbacks. It's progress that looks like stagnation until suddenly it doesn't. And if we only judge players by their lowest moments, we'll never see their highest potential. Stewart understood that. That's why she framed the critique as an invitation, not an indictment. And Cunningham accepted, not with words, with work. The kind of work that doesn't make headlines. The kind that happens in empty gyms, in late-night visual sessions, in the quiet moments between possessions. That's where greatness is built, not in viral clips, in daily choices. And those choices are starting to show. Watch her closeouts now. Notice the angle, the balance, the controlled aggression. She's not just reacting anymore. She's reading, anticipating, positioning. The effort is still there, but now it's directed, focused, purposeful. That's the difference Stewart was highlighting. Not less hustle, more intelligence. Not less heart, more clarity. But here's the real test. Can Cunningham maintain this growth under pressure? When the stakes are highest, when the crowd is loudest, when the game is on the line. That's where theory meets reality. That's where preparation meets execution. And that's where we'll see if Stewart's lesson truly stuck. Because anyone can look good in practice. Anyone can nail a rotation in a control drill. But can you do it when everything is moving at full speed? When fatigue sets in? When the opponent is trying to exploit your every weakness? That's the crucible. And that's where champions are forged. Stewart knows this better than anyone. She's been in those moments, felt that pressure, made those reads, and she didn't just survive. She thrived because she built her game on anticipation, on geometry, on the quiet confidence that comes from knowing exactly where to be before the play even develops. That's the standard she's holding Cunningham to. Not perfection, progress, not instant mastery, intentional growth. And that's a standard every player in the league can aspire to. Because it's not about being the most athletic. It's about being the most prepared. Not about the loudest hustle. It's about the sharpest mind. And that's the legacy of this viral moment. It shifted the conversation from who's tough to who's teaching, from who's failing to who's learning, from blame to blueprint. And that shift matters. Because when we prioritize development over drama, the whole league gets better. But the work isn't done. Cunningham still has reps to log, reads to refine, instincts to rewire, and Stewart still has lessons to share, perspectives to offer, standards to uphold. This isn't a one-time fix. It's an ongoing process. And that process is what separates good teams from great ones. So the next time you see a defensive breakdown, don't just ask who messed up. Ask what they were taught. Don't just critique the effort. Examine the system. Don't just praise the highlight. Study the build-up. Because that's where the real story lives. Not in the collision, in the context. And that context is changing because of Stewart, because of Cunningham, because of a few seconds of footage that sparked a conversation bigger than both of them. A conversation about how we develop defenders, how we build systems, how we bridge the gap between expectation and execution. That conversation is just getting started, and the league will be better for it. Because when veterans share wisdom, when young players embrace growth, when visual becomes feedback instead of fuel for drama, that's when the game evolves. Not through highlights, through honesty. But here's the final piece nobody expected. The footage that started it all, it wasn't just about one play. It was a mirror. And when Stewart held it up, the whole league saw itself reflected. Not just Cunningham, not just the Fever. Every team, every coach, every player trying to navigate a game that moves faster than the teaching can keep up. That's the real viral moment, not the collision, the clarity. Because once you see the pattern Stewart exposed, you start noticing it everywhere. The over-rotations, the miscommunications, the well-intentioned hustle that leads to breakdowns. It's not a Sophie Cunningham problem. It's a basketball problem. And problems only get solved when someone has the courage to name them. Stewart had that courage. Not because she's fearless, because she's experienced. She's been the player criticized for a missed rotation. She's been the veteran told she's not adapting fast enough. She's been the superstar expected to carry a franchise while still refining her craft. She knows what it feels like to be judged by a snapshot instead of a story. And that's why she chose to tell the story. But stories don't end with a single chapter. Cunningham's journey is still unfolding. Stewart's mentorship is still active. The league's evolution is still in progress. And that's the point. Growth isn't a destination. It's a direction. And the direction Stewart pointed toward? It's one where effort meets intelligence, where heart meets homework, where hustle meets humility. That's the legacy of this moment. It didn't just expose a flaw. It ignited a conversation about how we develop defenders, how we build systems, how we measure progress. And conversations like that don't stay contained. They spread, they influence, they change cultures. Watch the next practice session in any WNBA locker room. Listen for the language. Notice the emphasis. You'll hear more about angles, about timing, about anticipation, not just effort, not just heart. The vocabulary is shifting. And that shift started with a few seconds of footage and one veteran's willingness to speak truth. But truth isn't always comfortable. And comfort isn't where growth happens. Cunningham knew that. That's why she didn't deflect. She leaned in. She embraced the discomfort. She turned criticism into curriculum. And that's the mindset that separates good players from great ones. Not talent, not toughness, teachability. Stewart recognized that teachability. That's why she spoke up, not to shame, to shape, to show that defense isn't just about what you do when the ball comes your way. It's about what you do before it ever gets there. The positioning, the anticipation, the quiet confidence that comes from knowing exactly where to be. That confidence doesn't come from highlights. It comes from repetition, from visual study, from the 1,000 small decisions that happen when nobody's watching. And those decisions are what Stewart was highlighting. Not the collision, the calculation, not the contact, the context. And context changes everything. Because once you understand why a breakdown happened, you can prevent it from happening again. Once you see the geometry, you can master it. Once you learn the language, you can speak it fluently. That's the power of precise feedback. It doesn't just fix a play, it transforms a player. But transformation requires patience. And patience is rare in a world obsessed with instant results. Fans want wins now. Coaches need stops now. Analysts demand answers now. So when progress looks like setbacks, the reaction isn't she's learning. It's she's failing. That's the noise Stewart was trying to cut through. Because development isn't a straight line. It's a spiral. You revisit the same lessons at higher levels. You make the same mistakes with better awareness. You grow through repetition, not revelation. And that growth is invisible until it isn't. Until suddenly the rotation clicks, the timing sharpens, the impact multiplies. That's where the league is headed. Not because of one viral moment, because of 1,000 quiet ones. The assistant coach who stays late to break down visual. The veteran who shares a tip with a rookie. The player who chooses study over social media. That's how cultures change. Not through mandates, through modeling. Stewart provided that model, not by being perfect, by being honest, by showing that even legends are still learning, still refining, still growing. And that honesty is what makes this moment matter beyond the clip. It's not about who is right. It's about what we can all become. Because the game is evolving. The expectations are rising. The margin for error is shrinking. And the only way to keep up is to lean into the discomfort, to embrace the feedback, to turn criticism into curriculum. That's the lesson Stewart shared. Not just with Cunningham, with everyone watching. And that lesson is spreading. Because once you see the geometry, you can't unsee it. Once you understand the anticipation, you can't ignore it. Once you experience the growth, you can't settle for less. That's the ripple effect of precise teaching. It doesn't just change one player. It elevates the whole league. So the next time you watch a WNBA game, don't just look for the highlights. Look for the buildup. Don't just praise the hustle. Study the positioning. Don't just critique the breakdown. Examine the system. Because that's where the real story lives. Not in the collision, in the context. And that context is changing because of Stewart, because of Cunningham, because of a few seconds of footage that sparked a conversation bigger than both of them. A conversation about how we build better defenders, how we create smarter systems, how we bridge the gap between expectation and execution. That conversation is just getting started, and the league will be better for it. Because when veterans share wisdom, when young players embrace growth, when visual becomes feedback instead of fuel for drama, that's when the game evolves. Not through highlights, through honesty. So here's the final truth. The viral footage didn't expose a failure. It revealed a pathway from good to great, from reactive to predictive, from effort to execution. And that pathway is open to anyone willing to walk it, not just Cunningham, not just the Fever, anyone, because greatness isn't reserved for the naturally gifted. It's earned by the relentlessly curious, by those who study the game, who embrace feedback, who turn criticism into curriculum. That's the legacy Stewart left. Not a take, a teaching, not a clip, a compass. And that compass is pointing forward, toward smarter defense, toward deeper development, toward a league that values anticipation as much as athleticism. That's the future this moment unlocked. And it's a future worth building. One frame, one rotation, one choice at a time. The noise always fades first. The algorithm moves on. The timeline shifts to the next controversy. But the hardwood doesn't forget. And that's where the real story settles. Not in the trending tab, in the quiet hours, in the corrected footwork, in the pause before closeout, in a veteran's nod across a darkened visual room. Stewart didn't drop a clip to start a fight. She dropped a standard. And standards don't expire when the attention span runs out. They embed themselves into the foundation. They become the new baseline. They become the unspoken contract between players who want to survive and players who want to dominate. Cunningham's response wasn't a statement. It was a recalibration, a quiet shift in priorities. From proving toughness to mastering timing, from defending effort to defending intelligence. And that shift is what actually separates basketball eras. The WNBA isn't just getting faster, it's getting sharper. The game that once romanticized sheer will now demands calculated precision. And the players who thrive won't be the loudest, they'll be the most prepared. Think about what happens when a league stops glorifying hustle and starts respecting geometry. The rotations tighten, the communication flows, the chaos gets channeled into control. That's not a coaching adjustment. That's a cultural evolution. And it's happening right now, not in press conferences, not on social media, in the unglamorous hours, the early mornings, the empty arenas, the repetitive drills that don't make highlights but win championships. Stewart knows that better than anyone. She's lived it. Cunningham is learning it. And the next generation is watching it unfold in real time. Because greatness isn't inherited. It's installed, piece by piece, frame by frame, possession by possession. You don't just show up to play. You show up ready to be corrected, ready to adapt, ready to let the game teach you instead of forcing it to fit your ego. That's the unspoken truth of elite defense. You don't react to what happens. You dictate what doesn't. And that requires a level of mental discipline that most casual observers never see. They see the collision. They miss the calculation. They praise the recovery. They ignore the positioning. They celebrate the effort. They overlook the anticipation. But the league isn't blind to it anymore. Not after this footage. Not after this conversation. Players are studying the build-up instead of just the highlight. Coaches are teaching the angle instead of just demanding the hustle. Analysts are breaking down the spacing instead of just grading the stat line. The vocabulary is changing, and that change is permanent. We're already watching it take shape. The pace hasn't slowed. The precision has accelerated. The margin for error is thinner than ever. And the only way to navigate it is through anticipation, through visual, through the willingness to look at your own mistakes and fix them before anyone else can point them out. Stewart didn't do that for clicks. She did it because she respects the craft. And respect for craft is contagious. It spreads from veteran to rookie, from coach to player, from the visual room to the hardwood. That's the real legacy of this moment, not the debate, the discipline, not the controversy, the correction, A reminder that basketball isn't won by the strongest, it's won by the smartest, the most prepared, the most willing to evolve. And evolution doesn't happen on a highlight reel. It happens in the repetitions, in the adjustments, in the quiet commitment to get one step better every single day. So when you watch the next game, don't just track the score, track the spacing. Listen for the communication. Notice the half step that wasn't there last month. See the rotation that clicks before the ball even leaves the passer's hands. That's where the game lives now, in the details, in the decisions, in the quiet confidence of players who finally understand that defense is a language, and they're finally fluent. The footage will fade from the front page, but the lesson stays. Anticipation beats reaction. Preparation outlasts athleticism. And growth always wins over ego. That's the blueprint. That's the standard. That's the future. And it's already here. If this breakdown shifted how you see the game, drop a comment on the rotation that surprised you most. Subscribe for the next deep dive into the tactics shaping the modern WNBA. Because the conversation isn't ending. It's just getting louder. See you on the next session. If this breakdown changed how you watch the game, hit that like button. It tells the algorithm this kind of deep dive content matters. Drop a comment below. What's one defensive rotation you've noticed lately that completely shifted possession? Let's keep the visual session going in the replies. Subscribe and tap the bell so you never miss the next tactical breakdown. We're just getting started on uncovering the strategies, stories, and standards shaping the future of the WNBA. And if you know a fan who still thinks defense is just about hustle, share this video. Let's raise the basketball IQ one frame at a time. Until next time, watch the build-up, not just the highlight.